Mr. Phillips, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
What is your elevator pitch to the people of this district to vote for you?
My elevator pitch is for the last several years, I've been the regional director for a group called Reclaim New York. We've been fighting the mess in Albany. We've been fighting out of control taxes and corruption. That's a very noble mission. We have to keep fighting for reform. We can never give up hope. But Albany is so dysfunctional right now. I honestly believe I could do more for the people of upstate New York by working for reform on the federal level, by working for more choices in healthcare. We have out of control healthcare costs, by working to implement a welfare to work strategy, by trying to tackle the national debt. All these things will help the upstate New York economy. And what I'm saying to the voters is I'm a teacher by trade, but I was mentored by Jack Kemp, the Buffalo Bill star who spearheaded the Reagan economic revival, work on economic policy issues for the Jack Kemp Foundation. I also have worked on economic policy issues for Reclaim New York. I have the economic policy expertise, the drive, the passion, the vision to fight for a bold plan for America. That's what we need. We've had a lot of progress under the Trump tax cut, under the Trump regulatory relief. We still have to tackle health care. We still have to tackle welfare reform. We still have to tackle the national debt. But this is where we stand right now. We have to keep going, and we need bold voices in Washington.
Well, let's talk about the economy for a second. What are your plans for what you're going to do in Washington to help the people of this district?
Sure. Again, I mentioned healthcare, and I'm in a unique situation as working for Reclaim New York, a nonprofit, and they said, we have bad news. The family health care plan is $30,000 a year. Now, we'll pay for some of it, but I still had huge costs I was going to have to incur. So I actually don't have health insurance, and I know viewers will step back and say, wow, he doesn't have health insurance. I'm involved with a new innovative partnership called MediShare. So we share bills with other people in the partnership. My rates are much lower. I do have high out-of-pocket costs here, but I believe we need a dynamic market of choice for health insurance. Most people who are watching this program, most people when they look at their plans, if they have good insurance, they're giving up about $10,000 or more in salary that their employer's kicking in. They're then paying for a family plan another $5,000 to $10,000, and we're just looped into thinking, wow, I've got good health insurance. Yeah, I only paid $35 for a copay for a doctor's office visit, but that was on top of the salary you gave up, on top of the monthly payments you're making. And you usually have very few choices. We're looking at most people with their employer-based plans have plan A or plan B. Think about car insurance, life insurance, any other market. Restaurants down here in Utica, we can walk out, see prices everywhere, choose where we want to go, and that dynamic market of choice is what we need in healthcare. So I'm going to fight for more choices. If we could lower healthcare costs, that's going to help small businesses and individuals. Second, I mentioned welfare to work. There is dignity in work, and it's very sad in upstate New York right now and in this country. We have a situation where people feel they can do better by not working than working. In many cases, that's unfortunately true. We have a great employer that's down Route 12 here called the Raymond Corporation. There's probably not too many people from Utica making it down there, but Shenango County, Broome County in our district, out of every 100 people they hire, we're hearing they're only able to retain every 35 or 40. Too many people have given up the American work ethic, which is so much a part of the American dream. Too many people have unfortunately got into drugs and are giving up that work ethic, failing drug test. For everyone that's getting benefits, a requirement needs to be drug testing and also work requirements. And we have to have a situation where no matter who you are, we have to say you're doing better working than you would just on benefits. That's key. It really is crushing to the community around here. Unemployment rates may be low, but if you take into effect the amount of people who have given up looking for work, the workforce participation rate, it is really off. So that's a second point here. The national debt, I believe, is not just a drain on the national economy, but it affects New York State here. Can you believe we've reached a $22 trillion national debt? We're forfeiting our future, our children's future, and our grandchildren's future. We are taking loans from China and other nations to subsidize this, and we're doing it through U.S. government bonds, largely, which that's taking money out of the private sector, putting it to the public sector where it's never used as efficiently. So we need to tackle the national debt. And I believe Ronald Reagan had the approach. He had something called the Grace Commission. It was business leaders. They came in, they scoured for waste, They found that 1/3 of federal spending was wasteful and inefficient. 1/3 was of taxes went uncollected. They made recommendations they were never enacted upon. I'm running on a Grace Commission 2.0 where we have business leaders coming in, but also every member of Congress. On the right, Ted Cruz. On the left, Oscar Cortez. Ask them, where is the savings? What are 10 things we think we could save in this budget that is just busting the future of American families here? And let's get savings in, and let's tackle the debt and have a massive overhaul in Washington of the debt. So those 3 things I think will help the upstate economy. We have to keep going on tax reform. We have to keep going on regulations. Regulations, it's estimated, were costing this economy over $1 trillion a year. The tax code has been simplified, but it's still way too complicated, and it's still an estimated 70 to 80,000 pages long. Billions of dollars in compliance, billions of dollars in countless hours in trying to figure out this tax code. So we made a great first step here with the Trump economic agenda. We have to keep going.
The root of a lot of the problems you believe are hurting this district are Albany and the New York State government.
Right.
So why are you running for federal office as opposed to state office?
Sure. I mentioned we have to keep up the fight in Albany, but we can do things on the federal level that would help locally. I mentioned healthcare, I mentioned welfare to work, I mentioned the national debt. Another key issue that I want to tackle from day one in Washington is the fact that we are the only state in the country where federal welfare mandates are pushed on to your property taxes. And that's in the Medicaid program. Medicaid is health insurance for those who are struggling to make ends meet. It's an important program, and it's split between the federal government and the state government. We're the only state in the country where Albany politicians have said we are making the counties pay for this as well. If you look at your property tax levy, probably over 50% of your county tax, property tax levy is going to Medicaid. That's just wrong. Upstate New Yorkers, people in Utica, people in Oneida County, and throughout this district should not be paying for a federal welfare mandate on their property taxes. So we need to make that illegal. On the federal level, there's certainly precedent that we can do this. That's something very big that I want to do. And as mentioned, the other issues are very important as well. Another issue that affects the economy up here, and I think we're heartbroken as we look at the obituaries, as we hear the stories, anywhere from 40 to 50,000 Americans are dying each year in this opioid crisis. We need a strong plan to address this. Sure, we need law enforcement on the local level. Sure, we need treatment. Sure, we need an education campaign. What can be done on the federal level? We need to follow the model of Plan Colombia. For those who are watching, they'll think of stories in the 80s and 90s, Colombia just being a mess, cocaine being a huge national crisis, massive amounts of cocaine being funneled in from Colombia to the United States, killing Americans here, killing young people every day. The U.S. government got together in a bipartisan fashion and said, we are going to fund Plan Colombia, $1 billion a year to strengthen Colombian law enforcement, to smash the drug supply chain, to spray crops and destroy them. It was hugely successful. You don't hear about cocaine much anymore here. You hear about the opioid crisis. It started certainly more with heroin, so something that would be grown out of the ground. Now what we're seeing is the manufactured methamphetamines, and the source for this, for both of these, has been Mexico. We've given Mexico some of the equipment to spray crops. They haven't done it. We've talked tough on Mexico on border security, which we certainly need, and stopping illegal immigration. We've talked about the drug crisis, but we don't have a real plan. I'm proposing a Plan America. A Plan America is analyzing the situation with Mexico, coming up with the resources that are needed for the Mexican government to smash the drug supply chains that are killing so many Americans, as we did with Plan Colombia, to execute that plan. And if the Mexican government doesn't want to cooperate, we need to make our relations with Mexico contingent on the fact that they declare an all-out war on these drug cartels. The drugs are actually being manufactured in China, are being smuggled through Mexico and then brought here. So the Chinese are certainly a problem in this as well. We need to address that issue with them. That's why I'm calling it Plan America. That's a huge priority for me, and it's part of what I would call a bold plan for America, a dynamic market of choice in healthcare. There's dignity in work. We need welfare to work. A massive overhaul of the national debt and a plan America to take on the drug crisis.
You talked about Medicare. Many of the Democratic presidential candidates support Medicare for all, or at least a public option for those who are unemployed or find healthcare too expensive. Do you support this type of public option, or why or why not?
I do not, and again, I want to mention that I mentioned Medicaid before, so lower income insurance. Medicare is obviously for seniors. They paid into this program throughout their lives, and it's a very important program for them that we need to protect and preserve. But I did want to mention, if we open up the regular private insurance market for workers, the employer-based system here, that's going to improve healthcare costs and prices. That's going to improve the quality of care for seniors under Medicare. I do not support the public option or Medicare for all. Socialism, which is a catchword here now today, has not worked. Centrally planned economies, government-run programs have not worked. Look at Venezuela, on fire right now. Look at Argentina, an interesting case study. 100 years ago, as one of the 10 wealthiest countries in the world. They started tinkering around with socialism. They've struggled, they've waffled. The countries that are embracing the free market are succeeding, and it's very sad. This mirrors the situation in New York State. Would you believe from 1991 to 2014, as categorized in a book called The Wealth of States, the average national private sector job growth was 24%. In New York State with Wall Street, the average private sector job growth was 10%. Florida and Texas, pro-growth states, we're looking at Florida, the high 40s, Texas, the high 60s in job growth. We see the same thing here. New York State is spending twice as much as the government of Florida. Florida now has more people, so we have more socialism, we have more government programs, but it's more inefficient. We're actually costing, in K through 12 education, the average cost per student is $21,000 a year in New York State. So the more the government controls things, the quality goes down, unfortunately. And we're going to see that if under a Medicare for all, or I know my opponent, Anthony Brindisi, supported a single-payer plan for New York State here, and there's talk that that may pass next year. If that happens, we're going to see less choices, more costs to the taxpayer. We're going to see prices go up. Right now with healthcare, with all of its problems, we are accomplishing incredible things. I've had incredible care for family members. My father had a valve replacement recently. So we have that, but we have a very much distorted market. When the government controls it, I'm afraid things are going to get much, much worse.
You brought up education. Let's talk for a second about school inclusion. Studies have shown that people with disabilities live better lives when they're included in the general education classroom, and yet many districts are refusing to desegregate their classes. New York State is the 48th least inclusive state in the nation. What would you do to ensure that students with disabilities are included in the general education classroom?
Sure. Well, I'm a teacher by trade, and we've had a lot of students with disabilities in our classroom. I've taught deaf students, students with Down syndrome, and I love economics, and I love the debate, and I keep saying a dynamic market of choice, more freedom, but what we can't quantify in economics is the human condition and human love. And when you look at those with special needs, not only do they have needs from the community, but it's what they bring to the community that's just so special. And for anyone who's worked with people with special needs, have family members that are, they're some of the most wonderful people who bring love into this world and who challenge us to love more. So we certainly have to continue to make sure students are included, that we have this incredible experience. I remember in college, going through K through 12, I hadn't had students with special needs in my classroom in those days, but in college, being involved with Special Olympics, so special. So we have to make that a priority. I certainly want to be here for the families with special needs. A congressman that I served had formed an autism caucus, so I'm well aware of the challenges of autism. And obviously when we're talking about education, 93% of the funding is coming from the state and local level, but the money that is coming from the federal level often is for the Individuals with Disabilities Act, is for special needs programs. So we need to make sure that this continues to be available and that the states are making sure that students are being included.
One of the legislations that's used for school inclusion is the IDEA.
Yes.
Would you support a rewriting of IDEA that is more favorable to students with disabilities being included in the general education classroom?
hmm I'd certainly look into it. I would have to say the catchphrase from federal and state government then is felt on the local level here is mandates and unfunded mandates. So we need to pass legislation on all levels. And again, I'm not running for office in Albany, but saying we're stopping the passage of mandates onto local governments and schools without funding. So unfunded mandates is key. If we could correct that problem, I think we could do more with students with disabilities. And again, the federal government is putting money into education, so we need to look at this relationship here and the unfunded mandates.
Let's pivot to the Second Amendment for a moment. You said in the past that guns don't kill people, people with guns kill people, referring to how mental health plays a key role in the mass shootings of late. How would you work to ensure the treatment of mental health in this country?
A very important question here. It's something where everyone needs to step up. Sure, the federal government is going to play a role in terms of raising the issue, and I know there's grants and other programs that come down, but it comes down to the local, state, community level where we have to be aware of these needs and we have to reach out. So many of these tragic killings, had one person just been able to intervene and touch this person who was overcome by what I've said before and I'll say again, the power of evil. When we have these debates over guns and gun control, we can never underestimate the power of evil that's caused these horrific killings. And we know that many of the killers have plotted bombs, as they did in Columbine, and other destructive ways to kill people. So the health approach has to be a top-down approach where everyone's involved, everyone's talking about it on every level. We need to destigmatize mental health illness here. You wouldn't look at a friend who got cancer and say, oh wow, you have cancer, we can't talk about it. We would know that, look, there are some lifestyle choices like smoking that cause cancer, but besides that, most people are getting it randomly. It's genetics, we don't know what is causing it. We would give total compassion and treatment for them. Mental health is similar. So much of this is genetics. It's could be life experiences, traumatic life experiences that have occurred, but we have to be compassionate. We have to have mental health parity in terms of meeting the needs of those with mental health issues, certainly.
Do you support raising the minimum age for possession of a firearm to 21?
I'd have to say one that's going to be handled on the state level. My initial reaction thinking about this question would certainly be no. When you're 18 years old, you're responsible and you're responsible enough to serve in the military. So I don't see why that would preclude you from having a firearm if you are responsible. You're voting, you're serving in the military, you are exercising rights as an adult.
Do you believe in climate change, and do you believe it's caused by our actions?
So I'm an American history teacher, and I think you have to look at the scope of history and all of the data in these issues. Let's go into issues with an open mind and say what's going on. Is there evidence recently that temperatures have gone up? Sure. We could talk about that, and scientists could put out data. Is there evidence that temperatures changed throughout history before CO2 emissions? Absolutely. Think about the Ice Age, think about glaciers that came through this region forming mountain ranges. We know that there's other factors other than man-made conditions that have affected temperature. And as a history teacher, I would love to just point to a few great moments in American history. Did you know that the British, when they occupied New York, and the great moment is that thankfully Washington got in and they had to exit New York after Yorktown, but when the British were occupying New York, they walked from Manhattan Island to Staten Island. You might say, how did they do that? Was there a bridge back then that I don't know about? It was a cold period in history. It was a cold period at Valley Forge that winter, we know. But the harbor actually froze between Manhattan and Staten Island, and they were able to walk over there. So why did things start getting warmer after that period? We don't know. Look at the Dust Bowl in the 1930s in Oklahoma and other places. I know I have a friend actually who's in his 80s, and he said, I lived through the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. It was super hot there during that period. CO2 emissions were not that high as they started to be in the 1950s and 60s before we had EPA standards in the 1970s coming in and curbing emissions. And he said, we don't know why that period was so particularly hot. So I think it's slightly arrogant of man to say, we know this, we control this, and we're living through an energy revolution. We're living through an energy revolution that's been fueled by natural gas, which is a cleaner energy source, and it's helping American industry, businesses. One of the best ways to help poor people is through cheap energy costs. For someone who's affluent and wealthy, gas prices going up to $4 a gallon, like they did a few years ago, doesn't necessarily hurt them if they're making $1 million a year. But people struggling to make ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck, the median family income in this district is in the low $40,000 range. It's just amazing. So we need to embrace, I believe, the natural gas the energy revolution in terms of the alternative energy sources. Huge issues here where we have government throwing a lot of money into things, subsidizing things that aren't working. I want the clean, green energies to take off, but we have to be stewards of the taxpayer money with the subsidies. And the German model has failed. Their energy prices are 3 times as high as they were. They've had to subsidize coal plants to get them back online because the green energy things they were subsidizing just aren't working. So those are all the things we have to take into consideration as we're looking at energy issues and the issue of climate, as we mentioned.
In 2020, President Trump will be finalizing his exit from the Paris Climate Accord. Do you support this move by the president?
Sure, I do. We've seen this back to Kyoto, and we've seen this in other treaties here where you have the United States signing on to standards, other countries in the world signing on. I'm not saying some European countries haven't tried to keep these standards, but the rest of the world just walks away and says, we'll support these standards and then do nothing. The huge polluters right now are China, India, these countries with massive populations that have very low environmental standards. And we hear stories and we see people on the news walking around with masks in these countries. So I think it's absolutely ridiculous for the United States to be signing on treaties that everyone else is walking around. And I know President Trump said, look, I'm representing Pittsburgh. I'm representing the United States. I don't have to worry about what these European governments are saying about me. We have some of the best environmental standards in the world here in the United States. The standards that were put in place in the 1970s have curbed emissions dramatically. We have to keep looking at alternatives. And I think, again, I come back to the market, consumers, the idea that, yeah, we have hybrid vehicles starting to take off now. We have more fuel efficient light bulbs. All of these things, I think, are going to be market driven, and we will have success. But I'm very hesitant about presidents entering agreements here, as we saw with the Iran agreement, without the support of the United States Congress. One thing I will fight for in Washington is a return to the authority of the United States Congress. Everyone talks about the president. What's the president doing? The president's very powerful, but the president can only veto or sign what the Congress has sent him or her. And I think presidents of both parties have abused power with executive orders in which they are essentially making law. We saw President Obama do this on immigration. He legalized, essentially, was trying to legalize illegal immigrants through executive orders and create worker passes for them. In New York State here, now we have New York State law going around federal law and giving driver's license for illegal immigrants. Just absolutely preposterous. So I know I'm mixing two topics here, but again, we need constitutional authority, we need rule of law principles, and this is what I'm going to fight for in Washington as an American history teacher, a return to constitutional principles.
We also saw President Trump do a similar workaround of Congress on immigration when he declared his national emergency to divert funds for the border wall. Do you support that border wall, and what is your plan for dealing with immigrants, specifically from our southern border with Mexico?
Sure. So first, the border wall has been authorized by Congress, and many Democrat leaders who are now opposing funding for it did authorize the border wall. There is different appropriations that the president has leeway on in any account here, so he does have appropriations for the border wall. There's other related accounts that he could, under his power constitutionally, have money to support something that has been authorized by law. So I do support the border wall. I think the situation along the border is absolutely pathetic right now. I've heard stories, like many Americans have, of people, you hear stories, it's so hard to get in this country. Well, it's really not. If you look at these stories here, people are taking a bus to the Mexican border, they're paying coyotes. These coyotes are trafficking humans for human trafficking and sex, trafficking drugs in, and then taking people across the border. This is lawlessness. We need rule of law principles. And as a congressional aide, I actually worked on a human trafficking law, so I know how devastating this can be for women. in sex trafficking rings. That's going on. Drugs are going on. I do think the president, even though he emphasized this, the national emergency, in my opinion, should have been declared on the drug crisis. 40 to 50,000 Americans dying from drugs each year. That's as many as Vietnam, more than in Korea. So declare the crisis on drugs. The border wall is certainly part of that. But if we just secure a wall there, yes, we're going to stop more illegal immigrants, but you see more people coming in, still smuggling drugs in other ways. That's why we have to smash the drug supply train in Mexico that's coming in from China, that's coming from Mexico. And then finally, we have to deal with illegal immigration here in this country. And somebody would say, look, there's too many illegal immigrants here, 10 to 15 million. We can never find them. We can never deport them. There's a very easy situation for that. Think about where we are here in downtown Utica for this interview. There is small community banks and credit unions right around here. And you or I, or any of your viewers, could go halfway around the world to a poor country, and you could have a card from a local community bank and get money out of it from your local bank. Can you imagine that? That's incredible technology. That's the private sector. That's the world that works. Yet government, the United States government, can't verify that we have legal people working here. We have all these forms for taxes. We have all these income tax forms. The program is simple. It's called E-Verify, where we would make sure every employer is verifying the workers they have are legal. And right now we're looking at a situation where 60% of the illegals came here on legal visas but overstayed them. Visitors visas, other work visas, and they're now here illegally. If they couldn't work, they would return home. We wouldn't have to worry about law enforcement policing this because they're here to work, and we don't want to undermine their work ethic, but they're being taken advantage of by these smugglers, by businesses who want to pay them under the minimum wage. So let's do E-Verify. Let's secure the border, certainly. Let's smash drugs, and let's do E-Verify here. And it's been a lack of willpower to get that program in place.
Let's talk about the president for a moment. You talked about restoring checks and balances and restoring the power of Congress. The Mueller report detailed 10 possible points where the president may have committed obstruction of justice. At what point, if any, would you support the impeachment of President Trump?
Yeah, I absolutely would not support the impeachment of President Trump, and I am calling for, and we're getting ready to launch, a series of town hall meetings with the theme, this is the No More Investigations town hall. We had a special counsel investigate the president for over 2 years and found nothing. Now we have the Democrats in Congress continuing to want to investigate him and continuing to talk about that. What other issues are they running on? What other issues are they talking about? Healthcare is not being addressed. Welfare to work is not being addressed. The opioid crisis, it's being talked about, but these are things that should bring Americans together. What have the Democrats even sent to the president or sent to the Senate that's been stopped? In my opinion, they're the opposition party, but the majority party in the Congress. They should be passing bills and saying, this is what we stand for. Is it the Green New Deal? Is it single-payer health care? They should be out there passing this legislation and at least saying, look, the Senate is not negotiating with us. The Senate's not trying to meet us here. This is our agenda. Their agenda right now is investigation, investigation, investigation. And I think they don't have two legs to stand on with some of their other agenda. The U.S. Senate said, let's bring up Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, which would be socialism essentially. The Democrats in the Senate don't want to vote on it. So I want to have a town hall meeting here in Utica. You're welcome to cover it. And say, look, I'll answer any question you want, but I'm not going to talk about the investigations. We've wasted so much time and money on it. Is it a major concern that foreign governments are trying to meddle in our elections? Absolutely. Were there Russian hackers and Russians putting money into Facebook ads? Yes, that's been proven. Are there indictments handed out for them by this council? Absolutely. But was there a link to Trump? No, there was not at all. So it's time to move on from this diversion. And I believe it's just absolutely ridiculous that this continues to be out there. It shows how divisive politics are on the right and the left. But the left is constantly just attacking this president, calling for impeachment to satisfy a very liberal donor base. And as we get down to this, look, my opponent is Anthony Brindisi. He had a very liberal record in Albany. He supported the new bill. He was a co-sponsor of the new bill that's allowing infanticide in New York State. He was a co-sponsor of single-payer. He was a supporter of single-payer health care. All of these things that are unfortunately now becoming to fruition here, he was supportive of. And if you look at these campaigns, there's a group called Act Blue, which is just funneling huge amounts of money into left politicians to keep a majority in Congress. Brindisi raised almost $500,000 his first 3 months in Congress, mostly from national liberal money.
We are going to talk about abortion in a minute because you did bring that up, but I do want to circle back around to the Mueller report, though, because have you read the Mueller report personally?
I haven't read it, but I've certainly read updates on it and followed the news carefully.
Okay, I've read the entirety of the Mueller report, and it does detail in there instances where the President of the United States could have committed obstruction of justice, and Special Counsel Mueller specifically said if the President did not commit a crime, we would have said so. If the President has committed a crime or may have committed a crime, do you not believe that Congress should be investigating it and looking at all their options?
I think this has just gone on for too long, period. We do have a new Attorney General. He has been renowned for his statesmanship. His name is Barr, obviously, and he served under the first President Bush. He's looked at it and said the Justice Department's not doing anything more with this. So I think it's a settled issue, and I do find it highly concerning that so many of these investigations, when they turn up no crime, there was no crime to begin with. It wasn't that, wow, Trump administration officials have committed a crime like Watergate, where there was a clear crime committed, a burglary. Then you have this council just trying to get people to trip over their own words. And one comment on the Trump comments that have been detailed here in this report is, these are the words of an innocent man trying to defend himself. I would be nervous if a special counsel was coming after me and saying I did this, this, and this. I'd be talking to people in my administration saying this isn't true and trying to defend myself. So in many ways, I think you could say, look, this was a president who was trying to defend himself to aides and to others.
I do want to circle back around, though.
Go ahead.
Attorney General Barr is a Trump appointee, and as
Yes.
you have said, you want to bring back the power of Congress, and one of Congress's powers is the checks and balances. Just because it's gone on for more than 2 years, there still has not been a definitive answer on whether or not the president has committed a crime. There are 10 instances where the president could have committed a crime. Should Congress not look into that?
I think the whole point of the special counsel was to determine if crimes had been committed, if there was collusion, if there was obstruction. I think they should have been more definitive. If they said the president did obstruct justice, they should have said it. They left it open.
Well, the Department of Justice does not allow them to. The past policies of the Department of Justice are to leave that up to Congress, because that's Congress's job to have checks and balances on the president. That's what Special Counsel Mueller said. If we could have said that he didn't commit a crime, we would have.
I'll come back to my main point that the main thrust of the news right now, the Democrats in Congress, is continuing investigations, continue to try to find things when overall the investigation did not say a crime had been committed. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be appropriate to have a hearing on the finding of the report here, but this just seems to be the focus, the end-all be-all, and it's not the function of government. The function of government to have the opposing party attacking the president like this is just uncalled for. And no matter who the president is, no matter what the issue is, if the president of the United States of America is traveling abroad, representing this country before foreign leaders, as the president was at the D-Day ceremonies, and spoke very eloquently, by the way, talking about an altar of freedom, talking about the veterans there in their 90s, representing the glory of the Republic, talking about the Bedford Boys, a small town where 30 boys were serving, and 23 of them died on D-Day, and most of them died in the first few minutes of battle. We have this going on the one hand. Then we have Speaker Pelosi saying, we don't want to impeach the president, we want to put him in prison. That was highly inappropriate and just completely uncalled for. So I think things have gone too far. I would take a term from American history that goes back to Salem and also took us in the 1950s, a witch hunt. And I believe this just continues on here right now, and those are my opinions on it. So look, there should be some oversight by Congress. It's gone too far, it needs done. We need to focus on real issues now.
Understood. Speaking of real issues, let's talk about abortion. You are running as a pro-life candidate. Obviously, Congressman Brindisi is not. Why do you think it is important to protect the right to life?
Well, we have a Declaration of Independence, which was actually our founding document. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There is dignity in life. We talked about special needs children before. There's dignity and special needs. There's dignity in the elderly. And there's dignity in every single American life. We know that millions of Americans have either had abortions or been involved with it. We have to reach out with a healing voice, a hopeful voice for those who have been on the pro-choice side, for those who have had abortions, for women out there who really the response is, in my opinion, love and a hopeful message for them. Right now what's going on is simply radicalism. Congressman Brindisi was a co-sponsor of a law that now allows infanticide. And it's horrible to think of complications in birth and a child with special needs or a child that needs a surgery after they're born. We have to have protection for that life here. So it's very sad where the issue has gone right now. I also believe that strongly the prime function of Congress on this issue is to vote on taxpayer funding for abortion. There needs to be a firewall between abortion and taxpayer funding. There's plenty of pro-choice people out there who say, look, I want there to be, this is someone's choice, I don't want involvement here. Why should the federal government of the United States of America force Americans, and millions of Americans who object to this strongly, to pay for other people's abortions? I know Congressman Brindisi has been supportive of taxpayer funding for abortion as well. I do not. I think that's the main distinction between the two of us on this issue.
Let's talk about voting. Many of the people watching this interview are young people who are dealing with gun violence in schools, working minimum wage jobs, and will be dealing with the effects of climate change years from now. But they are not able to vote. Would you support lowering of the voting age on the federal level?
So one, I would say this is done on the states right now. The federal government left the states the jurisdiction for voting. I do think 18 is a fair age to do that, but my bigger concern is a teacher is getting young people engaged. That incredible moment in Philadelphia when Ben Franklin left Independence Hall and the Constitution had been proposed at that point. He leaves, and in the streets of Philadelphia, a woman looks at him and says, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. All of these issues that we've talked about depend on not the politicians in Washington and Albany, but they depend on a well-educated citizenry who is engaged. Think about the names of the towns around here. Utica, Rome, if we go over to the Rochester area, we have Greece, we have Ithaca, not too far from here. We have towns that were named after Greek and Roman cities, and that's because the Greeks and Romans embraced democracy and representative government so many years ago, and then those ideas lay dormant for so many years. They found their home here in 1776 in that great revolution. We're the heirs of 1776. We're the heirs of those who said, this is a government of men, not of kings. We're the heirs of those who fought for the dignity of every American in the Civil War and made sure the terrible injustice of slavery was turned back. We're the heirs of those who stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day 75 years ago. We're the heirs of Martin Luther King and those in the civil rights movement who spoke about the dignity of men. We have to tell our young people this. We have to engage them on issues. And I do express concerns in a free society of where things are going with the media and also college educators. I've had the honor of teaching at Broome Community College. I can't tell you how many students have come up to me and said, Professor Phillips, you're the only one who's showed us both sides to the issue. And I believe as a teacher, my job is not to say, look, here's my opinions and they're more conservative and I'm Republican and this is why you should do this. I believe the professors should lay out the debate, help students lay out the debate and say, this is what the right is saying, this is what the left is saying, and make your decisions. And I think the conservative issues they've been talking about, the more Republican issues here, are ones that make sense here and that work. Look at how stagnant the economy was, I would say to young people. Under Obama here, we had very low job growth. We had high taxes, high regulations, the government coming in trying to play a greater role. I would say don't give up your freedom. That's what made this country unique. And there's going to be businesses that rise and fall and try and fail. But in this country, I still believe if you work hard and make good moral decisions, you will succeed here in this country. And our country is filled with stories like that. So we need young people to embrace, I believe, a freedom agenda. Freedom's what's made this country great. And there's no limit, as my mentor Jack Kemp said, to what free men, free women, and free markets can accomplish.
Thank you very much, George Phillips, for coming on the show.
Thank you. And just in closing, just on that note, for young people, for all the listeners here, our greatest asset, Americans, is our human capital. The government's never made us great. The government's never made us wealthy. It's that American ingenuity. And would you believe, near this congressional district, in a little town called Richford, not too far from Cortland, we had the birth of a guy named John Rockefeller. And Rockefeller actually moved to Ohio and ended up revolutionizing the economy and the country here in this land. We had the birthplace of IBM in this district, and a guy named Thomas Watson was born on his family farm not too far from here. So think about what Americans have accomplished. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Americans putting a man on the moon. We can get through these divisive times. We will. I want to thank you for your time, and God bless everyone watching this program, and God bless the United States of America.